What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. We're going to be continuing our journey through some of the watches that we've gotten in. Today we're going to be looking at a really beautiful Omega reference 2279 from manufactured in 1950, gifted in 1953. Really cool story about the history of this watch, the movement that it's running on, and also the sort of life that this watch has lived, and I think that's what makes this watch really, really special. So we're going to be jumping into this piece. I think we're going to probably do a Longines next, and then an Omega after that. So super excited to jump into it. So without further ado, let's get into it. When collectors consider what were the greatest or most revolutionary movements ever produced by any watch company, many will point to the famous caliber 321 manufactured by Omega. This movement was of course used in the original Omega Speedmaster models that went to space, which make them extremely iconic in the world of collecting. The reference 2998 was the first Omega to reach space, strapped to the wrist of astronaut Walter Schirra, who wore the watch during the Sigma 7 mission of the Mercury Programme in 1962. But many forget that Omega produced chronographs before the Speedmaster that in their own right led to the Speedmaster models that collectors hold in such high regard. And even more interestingly, these pre-Speedmaster models use the same caliber 321 movement. One of these references, which you see in front of you here, is the infamous, one of these references that came before the infamous Speedmaster models was this reference 2279. This reference was launched in 1943 and was produced to late 1957. What must be remembered is chronograph watches during this era were produced in fairly low quantities compared to other models most brands carried, making the reference 2279 a fairly interesting reference from a rarity perspective. It appears that through research that there were 4 iterations of the reference produced, which are shown by the numbers after the reference number. So as an example, the one that you see in front of you today is from the 4th iteration, or the last iteration of this reference. So you would see the reference written as 2279-4. Before we dive into the importance of the watch, I want to kind of talk through this specific reference and the watch itself. So the watch has a 35mm case that's made up of 3 components. If we pick it up and show you the watch, you can see that there are 3 components that make up this piece. You see the middle section where the movement is housed, you have a case back that covers the movement, and then you have a snap-on removable bezel that covers the dial and houses the crystal. These cases were not water resistant, so finding 2279s in pristine condition is really a hunt and can be a challenge to find. The reference was produced in a variety of configurations, the most classical version being the one that you see in front of you that has a tachymetre counter on the outside of the dial. Other variations have come to market with pulsation dials and a spiral tachometer graduation for miles per hour at the center of the dial. There have been a couple that have sold at auction with these variations, and I encourage you to check out our article on lifeandthewrist.com if you want to see some of those examples. If you look at this watch, the lugs are fairly long. You can see that the lugs protrude quite extensively from the case. I will give you a close-up of this watch so you can see how the lugs sort of integrate with the case. But you'll see that the lugs are fairly long and protrude nicely from the case. You can really see where the lugs sort of insert with the case as well, if you look at it from a side view there, which give it some nice dimension. You'll also notice that if you look closely at the lugs, we'll take this top right one as an example. You'll see that the top right lug, you'll see that the lugs actually have, you'll still see sort of bevels on the inside of the lugs, which give the watch some nice dimension. You can definitely see it on the bottom left corner there. If you turn the watch over, you can actually still see a different, if you look at this lug there, you can see a different finish on that, on the piece of the lug that's close to the case, which really points to some really great condition that this piece is actually in. The watch has square pushers, as you can see on the side here. And what's good to note is that, as you can see, the crown of this watch is unsigned. Now, Omega did not sign the crowns that they produced until 1950. So what's really interesting about this piece is it was manufactured in 1950 and was likely what one can call a transitional piece, where Omega went from signing the crown to not signing the crown. Lastly, on the case, these watches were known to come in stainless steel, which is what you see in front of you here, but you also got some 2279s that were produced in solid yellow gold. If we use this watch as an example, I think this piece has an extremely strong case. As I've mentioned, you can really still see the bevels on the lugs, which point to minimal, if any, polishing. The case is in fairly good nick, and overall is a really nice watch. If we look at the dial of this piece, you can obviously see that there is some patina to it. It's sort of faded into this somewhat gray color, which I think is fairly attractive and gives it somewhat of an industrial look. So a really nice piece overall. Now, as the chronograph sort of ticks away, I think it's important that we speak about the movement that is used inside, that was used for this piece. The movement that the 2279 uses is the caliber 321 movement, which was a Lemania caliber designed by Albert Piget. The caliber is actually called the 27CHRO C12, which was what Lemania used to reference this caliber internally. But going forward, we'll just use the 321 as the name for simplicity. If you don't know, Lemania was one of the world's finest. Was one of the world's finest movement makers, and founded in 1884 by Alfred Lucrin. The company produced movements for many other great names, Omega being one of them. But because of the Great Depression, Lemania found themselves in a difficult situation financially, and so in 1932, Omega and Tissot with Lemania formed the Société Suisse pour l'Industrie Horlogerie SA, or the SSIH for short. This was basically a relationship where Lemania made movements that were used in many of these brands' pieces. In 1941, Albert Piget designed the 321 movement. Albert Piget designed the 321 movement and started producing and selling these movements in 1942. Obviously, Omega was one of these buyers, and they used this movement in their chronographs, one of them being the 2279. When you start, stop, and reset the chronograph with this movement, there really is a lot of intentionality, and the setting and stopping of it really feels very solid. You really feel the chronograph start when you press the chronograph hand. And then when you stop and reset, there is some intentionality with it. This is obviously really important because there is there have been studies done that show that when you have a chronograph movement like this, it's imperative that the chronograph actually starts when you press the start button, stops when you stop it, because if it doesn't start when you press the top pusher, it can actually wear the mechanism down because the movement thinks that it's supposed to be running. Now, provenance is obviously a really important thing when it comes to watch collecting nowadays. I hope we're not sort of overusing the word, but at Live on the Wrist, the stories of each watch are what make them special and what we try to capture with each one of our pieces. If we turn the watch over, you'll see a engraving on the back. This is a very light engraving that was done, and it might be difficult for the camera to capture it. I will give it a go to make sure that you can at least see it, but if not, I will tell you what it says. But there is a hand engraving that is a dedication and reads O.B. Roberts, Logan Boone, Mingo Area, BSA, 1942 to 1953. The inscription on this watch likely points to the sale and gifting of this watch in 1953 to an individual involved in the Logan Boone Mingo Area Boy Scouts Council in West Virginia. Now, I haven't been able to verify the story, but with some deductive reasoning, we can piece together maybe a few details about this piece. So, based on deductive reasoning, it appears that the watch was produced in 1950 based on the serial numbers and sat unsold until 1953 when it was purchased and gifted. Now, considering the years that are listed on the case back, it's likely that this O.B. Roberts individual was not a Boy Scout, because the max amount of years that a Boy Scout participates as a scout is 8 years. So it's likely that this individual, he or she, was maybe a parent, a contributor in the area, or simply just an advocate for Boy Scouts, who was passionate about the goals and the things that they could teach in the program. What's quite romantic about this, though, is that it's like this individual, O.B. Roberts, likely touched many young men along the way and taught them life skills that guided their lives even to today, and hopefully those individuals passed on what they learned to the people around them, the kids they may have, or just the people in their communities that were then touched by Boy Scouts. And so in some way, the watch feels like it stands for a bit more than just telling time and running one of the most iconic chronographs ever. I'll give you a quick wrist shot so you can see how this watch looks like on the wrist. Because I think at 35 millimeters, sometimes people will shy away from this case size. But I will put this guy on the wrist for you here, so you can see how 35 millimeters looks on my wrist. Overall, the watch is super strong. The longer lugs allow it to sit quite nicely on the wrist. Whoops. So you can see the lugs extend nicely, allow it to sit comfortably on the wrist. And super svelte, and exactly what a vintage chronograph would typically look like. So the reference 2279, the reference 2279 pre-Speedmaster chronograph has so much to offer. It's a classic steel chronograph with an industrial look of great proportions and beauty. Obviously, the dial on this has faded to a quite interesting gray color, and I think with a brown strap it looks really nice, but you could also put this on something like a beads of rice bracelet. It's running on one of the most iconic caliber movements ever produced, the caliber 321 Lamania-based Omega movement, but this version stands as a symbol for more than just its accolades in watchmaking space. it's really a symbol for teaching young men core values and life skills that I think the Boy Scout stands for. And now with Boy Scouts expanding to allow women to join, I think this goes well beyond just teaching men, but also teaching women those core values and life skills. And so you've got an iconic movement, an iconic lineage to the Omega Speedmaster, an incredibly beautiful chronograph, and a watch that is a symbol for teaching individuals how to live their lives with a set of core values. And I don't know if there's much more that you can ask for. And I think that's why this watch really symbolizes everything that we look for in vintage watches at Life on the Wrist. Hope you enjoyed taking a look at this 2279 from 1950, purchased in 1953, gifted in 1953 to an individual who's contributing to a Boy Scouts of America Council. The story just makes it so interesting, and I think that's why I think it makes the watch stand for so much more than just the fact that it's a vintage chronograph with one of the best calibers, or one of the most respected calibers ever produced by La Magna and Omega. So it's such a cool part of watchmaking. It was so fun to research and talk to you about it. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you want to read about it and see some more pictures, there's going to be an article on lifeonthewrist.com, so you can check out the editorial section of our website to read about it there. Do all the normal stuff on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. My question of the day is, do you believe that the Caliber 321 movement is one of the best movements ever produced by any watch company to date? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So leave me a comment and share this video with a friend who might be interested in watches. We'd love to have them a part of what we do here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and until next time.